How we doing? How we doing? This is Destination Denver, Colorado, and I've got a great one for you today. Denver or Boulder? Which is the better place for you to live? We're chopping it up, starting right now. All right, this is Destination Denver, Colorado. I'm your host, Jimmy Everett, and listen, if you're interested in learning all the ins and outs, pros and cons to living in or around Denver, Colorado, then this is a channel for you. So that subscribe button and notification icon popping up on your screen, make sure you're clicking that as I'm dropping new videos for you each and every week. And listen, as much as I love getting outside and trying to be a little creative for you, I'm also a licensed mortgage broker covering the entire state of Colorado and teamed with some of Denver's most talented realtors. So the number and email popping up on the screen, I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering your emails, there when and if you need me. Now that we have that fun-filled stuff out of the way, let's get to what we're here for, and that is Denver or Boulder, which is the better place for you. All right, so let's just get some basics out of the way. You're comparing Denver, the capital of Colorado, by far the state's biggest city, sitting at about 775,000, closing in on 800,000 people, compared to Boulder, much smaller footprint geographically and a population as of 2020 of 108,000 people, roughly 30,000 of those being students at the University of Colorado, aka CU. We like to flip-flop our letters, but regardless. So you've got a pretty big city compared to a town that's an eighth of its population size. Denver, visually, very pretty city as you pull up to it. It's got a great skyline, mountains behind it headed to the west if you're coming from east, obviously, but nothing really compares to Boulder and what you see as you leave Denver heading to Boulder and you come up over this ridge on Route 36. I'm going to show you some drone footage of it, and it's still not going to do it justice, but just how Boulder sits in this valley in front of the Flatirons. It's a breathtaking view. It's one of the prettiest towns, in my humble opinion, you're going to see. And the city of Boulder, town of Boulder, whatever you want to call it, they made a decision a long time ago that they're going to keep this green belt that wraps around the town facing 36 so that you always get that image. And you hear people talk about the first time they see it, it's a big wow factor. So Denver, Boulder, if you haven't Googled this already, geographically speaking, they're roughly 45 minutes to maybe as much as an hour and a half away from each other. What do I mean by that? Well, depending on where you're coming from Denver. Where I am in Lakewood, just on the edge of Denver, I can get to Boulder in 45 to 50 minutes if there's no traffic. If maybe you're coming from South Denver or East Denver, it might take you an hour 15, hour 30 to get there. So they're not terribly far apart, but just far enough to where people need to make a decision of which one or somewhere in between. So what are some key factors that would make someone choose Denver versus Boulder? Well, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way right off the bat. Denver, by a national average, is an expensive city to live in, from housing to costs, groceries, gas, utilities, things of that nature. Boulder is more expensive on average than Denver, housing being a major price point difference. Boulder, as of the making of this video, was roughly 30% higher, more expensive when it came to housing, buying, renting, 30% higher than Denver was. So you're talking about Denver already being higher than the national average and Boulder being higher than Denver. It's not a cheap place to live. So when people look at Boulder, much like as when they look at Denver, a lot of times they're looking at outskirts. They're looking at different areas somewhat close to Boulder that still give them access to the town. So the second key factor that you're going to want to consider when you're looking at Denver and Boulder is work opportunities. Where are you going to be working? Denver, again, a pretty major city. A lot of different jobs, oil and gas, tech, healthcare, education. So you've got a lot of options. With Boulder, Boulder has a lot of tech spaces. Google has a major headquarters up there, a major office. Microsoft is up there. So you have these tech companies in Boulder. That's a big employment opportunity there. But when you're looking for overall where people work, a lot of people from Boulder will make the drive, or from that region will make the drive down to Denver for work if they're not remote, of course. The third thing, obviously, you're going to consider is attractions. Now, Denver, you've got your sporting events, you've got a lot of concerts, you've got museums, and You've got the zoo and the botanical gardens. Again, when you compare a city to a town, Denver is going to have more amenities. It's going to have more things to do. There's going to be more restaurants and nightclubs and bars. Boulder, it's a different lifestyle. They have some great restaurants and some great bars to go to in Boulder. Is it a big, nightlife, nightclub town? No. Are there a lot of theaters and a lot of things to do? Well, I mean, in comparison to Denver, no. But for that small town living, the people of Boulder really enjoy that style of life. Denver is also a town that, it'll stay up till 2 o'clock. We're not crazy, but it'll stay up till 2 a.m. with its bars and nightclubs. Boulder, some places will be open later, but for the most part, Boulder goes to bed at around midnight, if not earlier. It's just kind of that vibe of a town. And there's also a big difference in Boulder between fall and winter Boulder when the CU students are there. And again, you have an influx of 30,000, 18 to let's say roughly 23-year-olds, as compared to maybe your summer months when that population goes down and the town is made up of mainly its local population at that point. Now, Denver is outdoorsy. There's no question about that. But they don't hold a candle to how outdoorsy and active Boulder is. And it is just, you can feel it, you can see it, you can hear it. It is a way of life. It does not matter if it's a beautiful day like it is today or whether there's snow piling on the ground. People in Boulder, they're out biking, hiking, snowshoeing. They're skiing. If you're living in Boulder, you're an hour away from some of the best ski resorts, whereas you might be 2 hours coming from Denver. They're always outside. CrossFit mania. And you'll just kind of see it in how the people are. It's very normal for people to just spend day after day getting outside and doing things. And when you're that close to the Flatirons, which are some of the most incredible hiking trails you ever see in just these beautiful mountains, and it's right outside your door. You leave Boulder, you go west that far, and you're in the mountains. It's just a natural thing to do. And Denver, Denver's filled with parks. And obviously you're not that far from the mountains. You can get to the mountains in 30 minutes. But when you compare just the nature vibe of the two towns, Boulder's going to beat just about any town you could consider. So that outdoorsy nature feel of Boulder is going to exceed Denver. It's going to exceed most towns that you see in Colorado, short of obviously getting into the mountains. Number 4, and you just got to talk about it with Boulder, is the people. So Denver, becomes more of a mixing pot each and every day. And by mixing pot, I think Denver still has a long way to go as far as diversity, but you have people coming from all over the country and all over the world to Denver. You got all the age ranges, again, a lot of diversity as far as races and cultures. And so with Denver, you get a variety of the type of people you meet. Boulder, has a long ways to go as far as diversity. As of the 2020 census, Boulder was 87% white. I want to say that Asians were the second highest at 5%. Right? So you have a pretty big gap between, the white population, gap, but you have a lot of white people in Boulder, and the diversity hasn't quite caught up yet. And the people of Boulder have a vibe to them. And I'm not saying it's a good vibe or a bad vibe. It's just interesting. One of my favorite things about Boulder is how, I don't want to say the people they're into nature. I don't want to say they absolutely hug trees all the time, but you definitely get kind of tree hugging vibes sometimes. And there's just a mindset about them that's a little different. One of my favorite things, my first trip to Boulder, just kind of spending time there years ago, and I'm sitting on Pearl Street, which we're going to talk about. And as I'm sitting there, a person driving honks their horn. A very natural thing if you've lived in a city before, but this person honks the horn. And you would have thought, the people sitting on this patio I was on, they were distraught. And this man very, very aggressively said, "Oh, that's not Boulder." They don't honk their horns in Boulder. So whereas I think Denver is getting a little more hustle and bustle, a little faster. It still has its patience, but it's getting a little faster. Boulder's kind of like the yoga center. People are just a little calmer, a little chiller. And part of that is the fact that you are in a smaller town and a quieter town. But some of it is just the fact that Boulder people take a lot of pride in the fact that they live in Boulder. Good, bad, or indifferent, they do. and there is just a different energy around them. And it's fun to be around to an extent, and there's certain times where you're like, man, I can't deal with many more Boulder people for a second. And Denver, Colorado, we say it's a purple state politically. Denver really becoming a mixing pot for that as well, because you have people coming from all over the country. Boulder, long known for being progressive, long known for being a little more liberal in their insights. I'm not a political person, so I'm not going to pretend to be able to tell you exactly what to expect there, but just know that Boulder has always kind of had a progressive mindset. It's how the people there tend to slide, and that has been ongoing for a long time. Not something that's going to change tomorrow if that's not to your taste. And some comparisons that may or may not make a big difference to you if you're a public transportation person. Well, Denver, the public transportation isn't terrible. It's not great, but it's not terrible. We've got the RTD bus does a pretty good job. Light rail, yes, the light rail could go to more places, but it does a pretty good job for what they've done so far and expanding. If you're a public transportation person, your public transport in Boulder is a lot more challenging. There's not a lot of buses. There's not, a light rail system. Public transport in Boulder is much more limited than it is in Denver. If you want to compare the weather between the two, Boulder, a little higher in elevation, they get a bit more snow, a bit colder, but not, and now there's probably some people in Boulder who are going to watch this and they're going to say, what are you talking about? It snows way more up here. Boulder does see more snow. Historically, it sees colder temperatures, but you're in Colorado. You're 45 minutes to 50 minutes from Denver. Our weather from one to the other isn't catastrophically that much different, and certainly not different enough to where I would say, oh no, you want to avoid 2 extra days of snow or 3 inches, you'd better stay in Denver rather than going to Boulder. That's kind of pointless. Now, unfortunately, Boulder and Denver do share kind of a common thread here, and this is something that I've heard from a lot of people in Boulder, especially since the beginning of COVID and the beginning of quarantine. Denver has had, an influx the last several years of homeless, and that has become more and more of an issue that, the city of Denver is having a difficult time solving. Part of that, and I don't want to completely blame homeless people for crime, don't get me wrong here, but the crimes of theft, of vagrancy, of car break-ins, that has increased in Denver, and Boulder is seeing the same thing, especially since 2020. Violent crimes, kind of say nationwide, is increasing. But what we're talking about here is there's just a lot more car break-ins, like apartment lobby break-ins, vagrancy, so package thieves, things of that nature. Denver saw it earlier. Boulder has seen it since 2020. It's just common feedback I'm getting from people. Now, I will tell you, my friends, my clients, the people I've helped in Boulder, my wife lived in Boulder for many years. She spends a lot of time in Boulder. The thing that people in Boulder talk about all the time is how safe they feel in Boulder. So I want to make sure I emphasize that the people who live in Boulder, they'll mention, some of the theft and some of the crime issues there, but they still overall will consistently tell me that Boulder is a place that they feel very safe for themselves, for their significant others, for their children. And Denver, obviously with some work to do, but Denver being a big city, and I'm a firm believer in this, 100%, do your due diligence as far as, your research on crime and what neighborhoods might make more sense to you than others. Big cities always have, there are these spots, there's just different locations. I've lived in many cities where, this block was okay and 2 blocks over wasn't, and this block was okay and 2 blocks over it wasn't. Denver's a big city. There are certain areas, the more populated or more dense the population gets, the more crime you tend to see reported. That's just something that I always encourage you to do your due diligence, do your research, talk to people specifically in that area, and you'll find the right spots for you. Always gets a little awkward talking about crime, but we want to make sure we touch base on it. And finally, I think when you just kind of look at the overall, I think a lot of what is going to make a difference between people enjoying Denver or enjoying Boulder is just kind of the vibe and the place they are in life. I tend to see, Boulder, not that it isn't for single people, but I see a lot of people who, if they are in a relationship or maybe they have family, they tend to love Boulder, especially if they're not like big going out all night and they're not big in, the sporting events, things like that. They just kind of like the energy and the vibe of Boulder. Denver is going to give you more options. It just is. It's a bigger city. There is overall more to do. But at the same time, you go to a town like Boulder, you walk Pearl Street, which is one of the most walkable, enjoyable strips of shops and coffee shops and restaurants you'll see, always filled with people in Boulder. There's a reason that Boulder is as desired as it is. And let's be honest, it's the reason that Denver and Boulder are two of the most popular places in all of Colorado to live. Which one would I pick? Well, technically I live in Lakewood, which is Denver, but my wife likes to drag me up to Boulder all the time. So there you go, take it for what it is. And it is impossible to truly define whether Denver or Boulder is the better place for you in a 15-minute video. So any questions you have, any conversations you want to have, the number and email popping up on your screen, just know I'm always the person answering your phone calls, answering your texts, answering your emails, there when and if you need me. This is Destination Denver, Colorado. I am your host, Jimmy Everett. That was Denver or Boulder, which is the better place for you to live. Until I see you next time, peace.